You used to trust yourself. You used to make decisions without second guessing every step. You used to believe you were capable of navigating life on your own. But somewhere along the way, that changed. You started hesitating, checking, asking permission for things that did not need permission. You began to wonder if you would fall apart without her, if you could even cope by yourself, if anyone else would ever want or love you. And when you tried to imagine leaving, you could not see a life on the other side. You could not picture yourself standing alone because she had told you in 1,000 different ways that you would not survive without her. And somewhere along the way, you started to believe it. That belief was not an accident. It was built brick by brick, comment by comment, until leaving did not just feel painful, it felt impossible. Today's episode is about a tactic that traps you by convincing you the cage is necessary, by creating dependency. We'll look at how this tactic works, why it's distinct from other forms of control, and why it lands so hard for men. Then we'll walk through 4 ways it operates: the survivor narrative, where she rewrites your history to place herself as the center of your stability; dependency through depletion, where you're worn down until your exhaustion becomes proof you cannot cope alone; the unlovability narrative, where your sense of worth is eroded until you believe leaving means being alone forever; and finally, the obligation trap, where the debt she claims you owe her becomes the moral chain that keeps you tethered to her. We'll close with tools for reconnecting with your own capability when you've been convinced it does not exist. And as always, for those who are new here, this is Stand Again, a lived experience platform for male victims of family violence. Abuse is not limited to one gender, but this channel focuses on the male perspective because it is so often dismissed or misunderstood. If this content helps you, please like, hype, subscribe, and add the word stand again into the chat. Those 2 words might just help a victim of family violence find theirs. Creating dependency is a long term psychological tactic where the abuser undermines your confidence, independence, and decision making while presenting herself as the one person you cannot live without. The tactic often masquerades as love, as care, or sacrifice. I only want what's best for you, or you'd fall apart without me, or even after everything I've done for you. These phrases arrive with concern in her voice, but they function as chains around your mind. Many tactics in coercive control create dependency as a byproduct. Isolation leaves you with no one else to turn to. Financial control removes your practical options. Undermining your self trust erodes your confidence to act. Exhaustion depletes your capacity to plan an exit. These tactics build the cage. Creating dependency is distinct. It's the explicit messaging campaign that convinces you the cage is necessary. It's when she tells you directly that you would fall apart without her, that no one else would want you, that she's the reason your life works, that you owe her too much to leave. The other tactics create the walls. This tactic convinces you the walls are keeping you safe. For men, this tactic exploits conditioning that runs deep. Men are taught from boyhood that their value lies in what they can do, what they can provide, what they can handle alone. Asking for help always carries shame. Needing someone already feels like failure. So when she positions herself as necessary for his functioning, she's confirming a failure he has already ashamed of. He wasn't supposed to need anyone. The fact he does, or believes he does, is already a wound. She presses that wound and calls it love. The tactic also exploits how men are taught to think about relationships. Men are taught that female attention is scarce and must be earned. Cultural messaging tells men that women choose, men are chosen. If she chose him, he's lucky. If she stays, he owes her. This framing makes the be grateful I'm here message land harder than it otherwise should. He's been primed to believe that her presence is a gift and that questioning that relationship is ingratitude for the gift. There's also the provider identity. If a man's value lies in providing stability for others, then leaving feels like abandoning his core purpose. He's supposed to keep the family together, he's supposed to endure for the children. The dependency tactic exploits this. Leaving her means failing at his role. So he stays, miserable but intact in his identity, because leaving would make him the kind of man he was taught to despise. Psychologists call the end state of this tactic hostile dependency. You remain tethered to someone who constantly hurts you because you've been convinced you cannot survive without them. The bond looks like commitment from the outside. It functions like captivity from the inside. You're staying because you believe there's nowhere else to go, no one else who would have you, and no version of yourself that could stand alone. This tactic operates through four distinct patterns of explicit messaging. Each one attacks a different reason why leaving might feel possible, and each one builds a different kind of cage. The first tactic is the survivor narrative. The survivor narrative rewrites your history to place her at the center of your stability. No matter how much effort you've put in, whether in your career, your home life, parenting, or personal growth, she recasts herself as the architect of your success. She takes credit for everything that works in your life. If your mental health improved, it was because of her support. If your children are thriving, it's because of her sacrifices. If you're respected at work, it's because she held things together at home. Your agency disappears from the story. Only her contribution remains. The mechanism is narrative hijacking. She tells the story of your life. And in her version, you were barely functional before she arrived. You were lost, you were struggling, you were a mess. She shaped you into someone whole. She gave you direction. She built the foundation you are standing on. The story erases your resilience, your effort, your capability. It replaces your history with her version, where everything good traces back to her. The psychological function is clear. If she built your stability, then leaving her means losing your stability. You cannot rebuild what you didn't build in the first place. You cannot trust capabilities you've been told do not exist. The survivor narrative traps you by attacking your sense of agency. It says your past was not really yours, so your future can't be either. For men who are raised to value partnerships and gratitude, this narrative is particularly effective. Men have been taught that acknowledging help is honorable, that being grateful is a virtue. So when your abuser says, "You wouldn't have any of this without me," you don't immediately reject it. You consider it. The man wonders if maybe she is right. And in that wondering, the trap tightens. Your openness to giving her credit becomes a mechanism of your captivity. What makes this pattern so confusing is that some of it might feel partially true. Maybe you were struggling when you met. Maybe she was present during difficult times. But presence is not authorship. Support is not ownership. The narrative she constructs inflates her contribution and erases yours. She did not shape you into someone whole. She convinced you you couldn't have done it without her. And that belief is what keeps you trapped. The second type is dependency through depletion. Dependency through depletion creates the cage through exhaustion rather than narrative. She generates chaos, conflict, guilt, or emotional labor so consistently that you begin to unravel. She drains your energy, sabotages your stability, and disrupts your ability to function. Then, when you're finally on your knees, she points to your collapse as evidence that you couldn't possibly cope without her. The mechanism is a cruel inversion. She destabilizes your world, then positions herself as your only source of stability. The very depletion she caused becomes the proof that you are incapable alone. She creates the conditions for your exhaustion, then uses that exhaustion to argue that you need her. You're too tired to fight, too disorientated to challenge the framing. So you stay. You stay because you've run out of energy to imagine anything else. For men, this pattern exploits the belief that exhaustion is personal failure. We are taught that we should be able to handle anything. When you're running on empty, working full time, managing the house, doing childcare, cleaning, cooking, calming the chaos, and still being told you're useless, you don't recognize that as being sabotaged. You believe you're failing. And every time you try to share the load, she finds a way to push it back. You're better at it. I can't handle that stuff. You know I've got trauma. The burden keeps growing until her judgment grows louder. Men often don't recognize depletion as depletion. Men call it just being tired. We might call it work stress. Men do not connect this exhaustion to her because we're taught that tiredness does not count. By the time a man recognizes he's depleted, he's already accepted the framing that he is failing. He's already agreed that maybe he can't do this on his own. He does not see that the exhaustion is the product of her sabotage. He sees it as evidence of his own inadequacy. The psychological function attacks your present capability. The survivor narrative says your past was not yours. Depletion says your present state proves you cannot cope. Look at yourself. Look at how you're struggling. Look at how you're falling apart. This is why you need her. The argument is compelling because the evidence is real in the moment. You are exhausted. You are struggling. What you can't see in that moment is that she engineered the conditions that made you this way. The third type is the unlovability narrative. The unlovability narrative erodes your sense of worth until you believe you are fundamentally too broken, too difficult, too much for anyone else to want. The message accumulates through comments, silences, raised eyebrows, sighs of exasperation. You are lucky to have anyone at all. You should be grateful that your abuser stayed. No one else would tolerate you and your flaws. She positions herself as the exception, the one person in the entire world willing to love someone as damaged as you. The mechanism works through repetition and recruitment of existing insecurities. She doesn't need to invent your wounds, she just needs to find them and press. If you already carried shame about your past, your mental health, your family, or your failures, she uses those vulnerabilities as evidence that you are now unlovable. She amplifies the doubts you already had. She confirms fears you've been carrying in silence. And because the attacks come from inside your own history, it feels like truth rather than manipulation. For men, this narrative lands with particular force because men rarely receive direct affirmation that they are wanted, valued, loved for who they are rather than what they provide. Men are starved of being told they are lovable. When she says, no one else would put up with you, it lands because he's never had evidence to the contrary. No one ever told him he was worth loving just for being himself. So your abuser is confirming what silence has already suggested. There's also the cultural script about male disposability. Men are taught they should be grateful for any love they receive. Female attention is positioned as a prize to be earned and kept at any cost. If she chose him, he's lucky. If she stays despite his flaws, he owes her. This framing makes the who else would want you message devastatingly effective. He's been primed his whole life to believe that his lovability is conditional and precious. The psychological function attacks your future. The survivor narrative says your past was not yours. Depletion says your present proves you're incapable. Unlovability says your future is forever alone. Leave and no one will want you. Leave and you'll spend the rest of your life proving what she always told you, that you're too broken to be loved. The narrative traps you through despair. You stay in the abusive relationship because the alternative feels like a lifetime of loneliness. Type 4 is the obligation trap. The obligation trap creates dependency through moral chains. She positions herself as the one who sacrificed everything, who gave up her dreams, her career, her freedom for you. Every act of support becomes a debt. Every moment of presence becomes something you owe. And the repayment demanded is your continued compliance, your silence, and your staying within the abusive relationship. Leaving becomes betrayal. Leaving means you're the kind of person who abandons someone after everything they've done for you. Throughout the blueprint of family violence against men, obligation appears as an underlying mechanism in many tactics. Gift ledgering logs every kindness for future leverage. Sacrificial martyrdom frames her suffering as your fault. Support as leverage turns help into currency. Here, we're examining the explicit version, the direct statements that frame leaving as a moral failure. You'll hear things like, after everything I've done for you, or I gave up everything for this family, or even, this is how you repay me. The debt is not implied here, it's stated, and it's positioned as the reason you cannot leave. The mechanism works through guilt and the exploitation of honor. Men are taught that loyalty matters, that commitment is sacred, that abandoning someone who sacrificed for you makes you a bad person. She weaponizes those positive values. She frames the relationship as a contract where she's already paid and you still owe. And because you value honor, because you don't want to be the kind of man who walks away from his debts, you stay within the abusive dynamic. You stay even when you're miserable. You stay even when you are being destroyed, because leaving would mean becoming someone you've been taught to despise. For men who tie their identity to being reliable, being a man of his word, being someone who honors their commitments, this trap is very effective. His own values become the bars of his cage. He cannot leave without violating his sense of who he is. She knows this. She presses on his honor the way she presses on his wounds. She turns his virtues into his vulnerabilities. She makes his integrity the mechanism of his captivity. The psychological function creates moral chains. The survivor narrative attacks agency, depletion attacks capability, unlovability attacks worth, obligation attacks honor. Even if he could rebuild, even if he could cope, even if someone else might want him, leaving would still be morally wrong. Leaving would still be betrayal. He would still be the villain of the story. And for a man who has built his identity on being good, that price he can't imagine paying. If you've already made to feel dependent, these tools that I'm about to step through are about reconnecting with the part of you that already knows you can stand. They work by building evidence against the narrative she's installed. The first tool is to reclaim your history. Start documenting your own story. What did you accomplish before this relationship? What skills, strengths, and capabilities did you bring into it? What have you built, survived, managed, and created? The survivor narrative only works if you forget who you were before she arrived. Write it down, make a list, create a counter record that reminds you you existed before her version of your story took hold. You built things before you met her. You navigated challenges before her. that person is still there. The second tool is tracing the source of exhaustion. If you're depleted, ask yourself where the depletion is coming from. Is the load genuinely shared, or have you been carrying it alone? Are the crises real, or are they manufactured? Is the chaos coming from life or from her? Depletion that comes from sabotage looks different from depletion that comes from circumstance. One of them lifts you when you leave. If your exhaustion is being used as evidence of your incompetence, it's worth asking who created the conditions that made you exhausted in the first place. The third tool is testing the unlovability narrative. This one is harder because the belief may have taken root before you met her. But ask yourself, is there any evidence that you're actually unlovable? Have you received kindness, respect, or care from anyone outside this relationship? Have friends, family, or colleagues treated you like someone worth knowing? The narrative that no one else would want you survives by keeping you from looking around. Start looking around, start noticing the evidence that contradicts what you've been told. The fourth tool is examining the debt. If you feel you owe her too much to leave, ask yourself, what exactly do you owe? Is the debt real, or has it been inflated? Has she actually sacrificed? Or has she claimed sacrifice while you carried all the weight? And even if she did sacrifice, does that create an obligation to stay in a relationship that's destroying you? Debt in healthy relationships is mutual and does not come with threats. If the debt only gets mentioned when you're trying to set a boundary or imagine leaving, it's leverage. If you have been told you would fall apart without her, if you have been convinced that no one else would love you, if you've watched your confidence erode until you could not imagine standing on your own, if you feel you owe her too much to ever leave, you need to hear this. Those beliefs were installed. They were cultivated through repetition and exploitation of your wounds. They serve her control. You built more than she's told you. You're more capable than you feel right now. The exhaustion you carry is evidence of what you've been surviving. And the debt she claims you owe her has been inflated to keep you trapped within the abusive relationship. In a healthy relationship, support does not come with a ledger. Partnership does not require you to believe you're helpless. Love does not position one person as the savior and the other as the saved. Real partnership builds your confidence. It celebrates your capability. It wants you to become more independent, more fully yourself. It makes room for your growth rather than framing your growth as a threat. You existed before her, you will exist after. The part of you that could stand alone did not disappear. It was buried under narratives designed to keep you small. And it's still there, waiting for you to remember. I've said this many times, I'll say it again. No matter how many times you have been knocked down, you can stand again. Thank you. This is Stand Again, lived experience platform for male survivors of family violence. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Your voice might just help another man find his. If you're looking for one on one support, you can book coaching with a member of the Stand Again team. Simply visit standagain.com.au, where you will also find grounded information on surviving and recovering from family violence as a man. As always, remember that no matter how many times you've been knocked down, you can stand again.